This podcast is sponsored by AXA Farm Insurance. AXA offers tailored cover to fit your unique needs, whether it's public liability or protection for your family home, outbuildings or farm vehicles. Based in Athlone, the AXA Farm team of agri-specialists and regional managers work together to ensure you receive the seamless support you need. Switching to AXA is easy thanks to an innovative online service that enables you to quickly and easily find the best cover for your needs. For more information, head to axa.ie. AXA Insurance DAC is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to AgriFocus, brought to you by Agriland and AXA Insurance. I'm Stella Meehan and I'm joined today by Superintending Veterinary Inspector Audrey Jenkinson from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine to discuss avian influenza, more commonly known as bird flu. Now, most recently, the highly pathogenic virus has been discovered in a wild buzzard in Dublin and another wild buzzard in County Galway. So let's start off at the beginning, Audrey, because some people hear the term bird flu, but they might not understand exactly what it is. So firstly, what is avian influenza or bird flu? And is there only one kind of it, or can you explain the different strains?
Sure, and thanks, Stella, for the invitation to come in and speak to you today on this important topic. So, as well, avian influenza, it's the disease caused by avian influenza viruses, and these are, avian is bird, so they're generally viruses that circulate in birds, but they can on occasion affect mammals as well. And we know that the strain of H5N1 that's circulating at the moment, that's actually been detected in over 30 different kinds of mammals. And avian influenza or bird flu, then it's also a zoonotic disease. So although the risk to humans is low, it can on occasion affect people as well. So that's another reason.
And that's what you mean by zoonotic. It means it can transfer on occasion from animal to human.
Exactly. A zoonotic disease is one that can transfer from an animal to human.
Do you know, through your own work, Audrey, if there is any evidence or research anywhere as to where this might have originated? Or is it that type of virus, similar to we look back now and say, where did the COVID virus originate? And they've sort of narrowed it down to a part of China. But is it a similar instance in this? Can you narrow it down to where it might have originated?
Well, I suppose avian influenza viruses have been around for a very, very long time. So I suppose the first reference to we call it bird flu kind of colloquially these days, is the proper terminology is avian influenza. But even as back as the 1800s, they did refer to fowl plague as what it was known as then. So it's a thing that has been circulating in birds, for even longer than we've had the technical ability to look at viruses and to study viruses in great detail. So it has been around for a very long time. There are different strains of it. And these strains, they have different surface protein on the surface of the virus, and they can actually mutate and they can change. And this is where, different strains can come into play.
That's very similar to the human flu.
Exactly. And there's different, we have the human flus, and there's the avian flus, and there's other, we have swine influenza as well. Not to be confused with African swine fever, which is a different thing, but that there are influenzas that affect different animals, and there are equine influenzas as well, that people will be familiar with. So where did it originate from? We know that the virus, its natural hosts, I suppose, are generally in wild waterfowl. So it can circulate in those birds. There are then all these different wild bird migratory flyways around the world. And a lot of these flyways actually overlap in kind of northern Russia, Siberia, China. And so you can get lots of mixing of different species and breeds of birds. And you can get, kind of mixing of the viruses. We got recombination, and the viruses can kind of mix between the birds and then can pass down to different flyways and can mix into different populations of birds. So that's how they can spread around the world. So A lot, we've known that H5N1 has been circulating in Asia for some time, but I mean, H5N1 has been detected in Europe as far back as the 50s, different strains of it. So, like, again, it's not a new thing, but it does come around in cycles, and like you say, it changes and it adapts. So,
and referring then to the wild birds or avian influenza in wild birds and detecting it, what would you say are the main symptoms that maybe the public might pick up on if they saw wild birds?
Okay, so oftentimes there's two forms of avian influenza. There's highly pathogenic avian influenza, which is the one we're talking about at the moment, and there's low pathogenic avian influenza.
And will you explain what that means, pathogenic, to people?
So the pathogenicity really comes as to how this disease manifests in birds. So with the highly pathogenic avian influenza, this can affect birds very, very badly. And we can know, in particular in chickens and turkeys that are highly susceptible to this, you can get 100%, up to 100% mortality in flocks within 48 hours of them, becoming infected. So it can affect them really, really badly. So now the highly pathogenic and low pathogenic, this is really just how it manifests in birds. Any avian influenzas can be potentially, like we're saying, zoonotic, although the risk is low. We know that there is a risk there. And that's why we would always recommend that people don't touch or handle, pick up sick or dead wild birds. Because often what we will see is even in wild birds, although the likes of the waterfowl, ducks and geese mightn't show as overt clinical signs of disease, they can and they do still show signs, but they're often lesser than the likes in the signs that we get in the chickens and turkeys. So often people will find wild birds either dead, that's the most common presentation, they'll just be found dead, or it also affects their brain and their nervous system. So they can have what we call nervous signs. So they may look kind of, off balance. They mightn't be able to fly. They can seem disorientated. That kind of thing. They could be drooping a wing or a head turned around, or so they can have those kind of signs as well. But often when people see wild birds with avian influenza, they will actually be dead at that stage.
Okay,
unfortunately.
And then in terms of poultry keepers, so this is not the wild birds that you might see on a beach now or something. We're talking, there's lots of poultry in Monaghan and Cavan area in particular. So what should poultry keepers keep an eye out for in terms of the symptoms?
So some of the classic symptoms that we will find, or that are, people will read about are, potentially coughing, sneezing, but that's what we think about with human influenzas. With avian influenzas, it's actually more spread through bird feces and bird droppings. Okay, so that's something just to be mindful of as well. In that's how birds tend to spread it, and that's how poultry may become or may infect. Wild birds may infect poultry when they come in contact with wild bird droppings that are infected. But the signs that people need to look out for then in poultry more commonly would be things like in laying flocks egg drop, or they might lower feed and water intake. But like I was saying earlier, often the mortality rates are really, really high. So although you can get signs like ruffled feathers, or even the neurological signs, like I was saying, like the birds disorientated or off form, often the first thing that people will see is just these rapidly increasing mortality rates. But like I say, you can have egg drop, bluing of the. You wouldn't see it so much in ducks and geese, but in the likes of chickens and turkeys, you can see either their wattles or combs or their heads can turn kind of a bluey colour. One thing that actually our field officers have noticed in the field when you walk into a house of birds that are suffering with bird flu is just this really unusual stillness and quietness. Normally you'd walk into a poultry house and you'll hear the noise, the natural noise of birds that you'd hear when you go into the house. Whereas in this case, there's you just know straight off something is not right, and the birds are quiet. But any suspicion then of bird flu in a flock needs to be reported to the department, immediately, so that we can investigate and rule out whether avian influenza is the cause of that illness or not. Because as I say, it will take hold of the flock and spread very quickly.
It's prevalent in some areas, and we're looking over at the UK at the moment. And on Agriland, we've reported, I suppose, on a significant prevalence of it now being detected in places like Yorkshire in the UK. Why is that concerning for us in Ireland?
Well, in Great Britain, they've had a lot of wild bird cases as well, so they know that the infection is widespread around the country. In the UK as well, they have two different strains on the go at the minute. So they have the H5N1, which is responsible for the majority of the outbreaks that are ongoing in Europe. But they also have a H5N5 strain as well, which has been detected like that along the eastern coast of the UK, including places like Norfolk and Yorkshire, and up into Iceland and Finland, or Norway, sorry, not Finland, Norway as well. So they have two strains on the go there. And what we know then is, and the Norfolk in particular has had quite a few outbreaks as well in Yorkshire, and they're particularly high poultry dense regions. So what we know then is the infection pressure. If there's a lot of viruses circulating and they're in wild birds, we have a very similar population of wild birds here, and wild birds will migrate, westwards. So if the infection pressure is high in the wild bird population in the UK, there's a risk that it can spread to Ireland as well. We're really not that far away. And again, if there's a high instance in the wild bird population, which gets into poultry, it's that whole piece around biosecurity measures being so important, because there's been over 300 cases reported in recent months, across mainland Europe. And one country in particular, Hungary, has seen an awful lot of secondary spread from one poultry farm to another. So it's poor biosecurity. It's actually spreading between farms. So it's another, if we know it's circulating and it's in the wild birds, and wild birds are spreading it in their feces, it's ramping up the amount of virus that's in the environment. So that's the significance of the prevalence in the UK.
And I'm interested in the US as well. I mean, we have consistently been told that there isn't a very significant risk or threat to the humans, I suppose, through the food supply chain. But we have mentioned that it is a zoonotic virus, so it can transfer. And there was a death reported recently in the US as a result of avian influenza. And we've also heard a lot in the US as well about dairy cows and milk being tested and having strains or traces of it in it. But what could be the impacts for humans? Or do you think what has happened in a larger scale in America is something that could happen across Europe?
Well, what we know, there's been over 900 cases now in dairy herds in the US, and predominantly in California at the moment. And so that's a strain that's circulating in the United States. That strain hasn't been found in Europe. But like we know, these viruses are very adaptable. And that's where the precautions have to come in. In that, well, we know pasteurization of the milk destroys the virus, so it's not a food safety or a public health issue in that respect. We do know that there's been about just over 60 cases of avian influenza associated with farm workers. Thankfully, all of those cases have been mild. They generally get conjunctivitis, so these sore eyes where the virus has actually gone in through the mucous membranes in their eyes. But thankfully, they've all recovered, uneventfully, that kind of, thing. That's a different strain than the human case that unfortunately resulted in a fatality. And that was an avian influenza strain that is circulating in wild birds in the US at the moment. And again, although the risk is low, it highlights the fact that although the risk is low, there is a risk. And it's why we would always remind the public and everybody that, not to touch or to handle these sick wild birds. Although the risk is low, there is still a risk there. And just to be mindful of that, yeah.
So what action, first of all, could a flock owner, a poultry keeper take if they get confirmation? What are the next steps if there's confirmation of avian influenza, among the birds, whether it's one bird or 100 birds? What action should they take then?
So the really important thing here is early notification of any suspicious signs of avian influenza or any kind of unexplainable disease syndrome in the birds, and to notify the department either through their regional veterinary office or actually through our national disease emergency hotline is available 365 days a year. So, and I don't, if you want that number, it's 01492 8026, and that's for all these notifiable diseases. But avian influenza would be one of those things where we would send a team out to collect samples, a representative number of samples from
and that's a team
birds.
From the department?
That's a team from the department, yeah. The premises itself would be restricted because just even while this investigation is going on, we need to make sure that there's no movement on or off the farm, as we know this is a very contagious type of virus, and it can spread very easily. And we know from the poultry industry as well, it's a very integrated industry. So there will be a lot of movement between, whether it's poultry catchers or feed mills, so we don't want the risk of, if there is avian influenza on a flock, we don't want it spreading elsewhere. So our team from the department would go out, take a representative set of samples, and they're then tested in our Central Veterinary Research Lab in Backweston. And the results are turned around very quickly. So we'll either know whether it is or it isn't avian influenza. If it turns out it is confirmed, unfortunately, and this is why biosecurity is so important. The prevention piece is so important, and we have our biosecurity measures, regulations in place in an effort to do that, because the consequences are devastating for farmers. If highly pathogenic avian influenza is confirmed on a flock, all birds on site will be humanely culled. Any products on site as well, so any eggs or that kind of thing would also be would need to be destroyed safely as well.
So the preventative action, Audrey, I suppose when they get to the point where they might have confirmed, the department steps in, then the zones, and we have them in Northern Ireland as well as the Republic of Ireland. There's certain restricted zones around it. But at that point, there's not a lot that the poultry keeper can do. Obviously, it's a cull at that stage, and various measures are taken then. So really, the important message is to try and make sure that it doesn't come into your flock as far as possible in the beginning. And that's all to do with your biosecurity preventative measures.
Yeah. So what we would normally what would be our gold standard biosecurity advice has now, since the 6th of December, become our biosecurity regulations. Now they're available on our website, and nobody wants to open the Irish statute book and start reading regulations. I mean, poultry farmers are very busy, but we have a lot of information on our gov.ie /bird flu website, where it sets out, like, what does this actually mean for me? What do I have to do? Now it's the basic. It's fairly basic measures. It's what would normally be our gold standard advice, as I said, but it's just to ensure that these are being enforced consistently, all day, every day. Like we say, biosecurity, it's like a chain. It's only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. So, whether there's different people coming in at the weekends, that they're aware of what protocols are in place and the preventative measures. So it's simple things like, reducing the movements on and off farm. Like we were saying, we know that avian influenza is circulating in wild birds. There's been one bird confirmed in Galway and one bird confirmed in Dublin. So, I mean, it's unlikely that they're the only two locations that, it just means that the virus could be elsewhere as well. So we need to just be mindful of that. So, and like we were saying, it's spread by feces, and it can be spread on equipment and on vehicles if they've become contaminated with that kind of infected feces. So it's about reducing the movements onto poultry farms to just essential visitors who really needs to be on that farm. It's about having, disinfection points in place, clean footwear, dedicated clothing, going into poultry houses, ensuring that bedding has been stored away from access from wild birds. It's really all about preventing any contact with wild birds or their feces with poultry. So it's important just to state this is not a housing order. So, birds don't need to be housed or confined at this point. Now, any decisions around housing orders are always made, based on the current epidemiological situation and the best, information that we have at the time. So if bird flu rates in wild birds were found to be increasing or whatever, like those kind of decisions are risk assessed and, continually. But at the moment, there is no housing order. So birds can still be kept outside. So it's important just to, ensure that poultry are fenced away or are netted in away from wild birds or areas where wild birds have been. Another thing is just checking the actual integrity of the house. We know, so for example, if there was a hole in the roof or leaky gutters or downpipes or whatever, water that's been contaminated with wild bird feces that's infected, if you have a hole in your roof, that can pour into your poultry house, that can be a source of infection. Or open vents, they can be a source of infection. And actually research has shown that as well, that where there's a risk of flooding or where there has been flooding, it also increases the risk of bird flu incursion as well. So
that's very interesting. And it isn't just the poultry owners with these big poultry houses. Every bird owner in the country needs to be aware, whether you're not particularly into farming or agriculture, but you have 4 or 5 hens out the back, or you have a couple of ducks, that you have, and they're your pets and they're your babies. You don't obviously want anything to happen to them, and you can't prevent wild birds from flying into your garden and so on. But it's just to take those little extra precautions, because, as I said, we just don't want it spreading. I think some people wonder as well, humans have flu all the time. What's the big difference? It will have a big impact on our poultry sector if this got a stranglehold, really, wouldn't it, Audrey?
Absolutely, yeah. It's devastating for the poultry sector. There's not only the economic consequences on farm if a case is confirmed on your farm, because obviously that means, depopulation of the flock. It's a very rigorous cleaning and disinfection protocol then after that. But once a case has been confirmed, there are 3-kilometre protection zone and 10-kilometre surveillance zones implemented or, enforced around that outbreak. And that has implications on trade. Certain products, there's also, it's also very onerous on other poultry farmers,
of course,
within and you've the likes of slaughterhouses. Birds have to be licensed, within those zones. They can't move freely, because we need to know where birds are moving. We need to be able to, trace back products that have moved. So there's implications, wider than just the individual farm, and it does impact on our ability to, export certain products to certain countries. So it does have very wide knock-on implications for not just the individual farmer, but the country in general.
And finally, just to give that number again for people if they want to report anything, if they see symptoms, if they see a dead bird, if they have concerns within their own poultry, where is the best place to get the information? And what was that number for the hotline again, Audrey?
So, and just to emphasise as well, there is an avian check app, which we have available on our website as well, which is exclusively for the reporting of dead wild birds, sick or dead wild birds. Now, we may not collect all. We may not collect all birds. We do representative sampling, targeted sampling around the country. So if we know that bird flu is in wild birds in a certain area, we have limited. We only have so many resources from our field officers. So we targeted that. So our current policy is to collect 1 raptor, including owls, or 3 or more dead waterfowl, or 5 or more of any other species. And we do surveillance on that year round around the country to try and see what is the situation with avian influenza in the country. So that's specifically for wild birds. If it's a suspicion in poultry, what people need to do is either contact their regional veterinary office, so they'll be aware, as I say, all flocks, irrespective of whether you have 1 or 2 pet birds or backyard flocks, all flocks should be registered with your local regional veterinary office. And that way we can get disease alerts out to you. We can get a handle on the situation if surveillance needs to be done because there's an outbreak in an area. So that registration piece is important. And either notify any suspicion to your regional veterinary office or to us at the emergency disease hotline, which is 01492 8026.
Perfect. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've time for on this week's episode of AgriFocus, with everything focused on bird flu. But thank you once again to our guest today, Superintending Veterinary Inspector with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Audrey Jenkinson, and also to our sponsors, AXA Insurance. Please rate and review this podcast to ensure we can continue making informative podcasts for you, our audience. And please share it with anyone who you think might like to listen. Until next time, goodbye and take care.
This podcast is sponsored by AXA Farm Insurance. AXA offers tailored cover to fit your unique needs, whether it's public liability or protection for your family home, outbuildings or farm vehicles. Based in Athlone, the AXA Farm team of agri-specialists and regional managers work together to ensure you receive the seamless support you need. Switching to AXA is easy thanks to an innovative online service that enables you to quickly and easily find the best cover for your needs. For more information, head to axa.ie. AXA Insurance Stack is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.